The wrench slipped from my greasy fingers as Melissa's shadow fell across the garage floor. I'd been under the hood of my old Honda for 2 hours, trying to fix a rattling noise that had been driving me crazy for weeks. The fluorescent light above cast harsh shadows, and the smell of motor oil mixed with the October chill seeping through the open garage door. "Jack, we need to talk." I wiped my hands on a rag and looked up at my wife of 15 years. Melissa stood in the doorway between the garage and kitchen, perfectly composed even at 11:30 on a Tuesday night. Her blonde hair was pulled back in that severe bun she wore for important meetings, and she changed into the black dress I'd bought her for our anniversary last year. "Kinda late for serious conversations, isn't it?" I said, closing the hood with more force than necessary. "I've got the Morrison security audit first thing tomorrow. I'm going on a date." The words hung in the air like exhaust fumes. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline or the context that would make this make sense. Melissa worked as a marketing executive downtown, pulling in twice what I made as an IT security consultant. She had meetings, client dinners, networking events. Maybe she meant some work thing. "A date," I repeated slowly, "with Trent from the office." She crossed her arms, and I noticed she'd painted her nails that deep red color she only wore for special occasions. "We've been talking, and I think it's time I explored other options." The garage felt smaller suddenly, the walls pressing in. 15 years of marriage, and she was standing there like she was ordering coffee, casual, matter of fact. Like she was telling me she'd be late from work. "Other options," I said. "I'm not happy, Jack. I haven't been for a while." She shifted her weight, and her heels clicked against the concrete. "You know this. We both know this." I did know this. The conversations had gotten shorter over the past year. The silences longer. She'd started working later, going to more company events, spending weekends at her sister's place. But knowing your marriage is in trouble and having your wife announce she's dating someone else are two very different things. "So you're just telling me, not asking, not suggesting counseling or a trial separation or any of the normal things people do?" "I'm being honest with you. I thought you'd appreciate that." "Honest." "Right." I looked at her standing there in that black dress, makeup perfect, even though she'd supposedly been home all evening. The pieces clicked together like a security system falling into place. This wasn't spontaneous. This was planned. "How long?" I asked. "What do you mean?" "How long have you been planning this conversation? How long have you been talking to Trent? How long have you been lying to me?" Her jaw tightened. "I'm not lying. I'm telling you exactly what's happening. After it's already happening." She sighed, the sound sharp with irritation. "I knew you'd make this difficult." "Difficult." I laughed, but it came out wrong, bitter and hollow. "My wife tells me she's dating another man, and I'm being difficult for having questions." "I'm leaving now," she said, checking her phone. "We can talk more tomorrow." She turned toward the kitchen, and something cold settled in my chest. Not anger exactly, but something harder, more focused. I'd spent 20 years in IT security, learning how systems worked, how they failed, how they could be exploited. People were just another kind of system. "Melissa," she paused in the doorway, "if you walk out that door tonight, everything changes." She looked back at me, and for just a second, I saw uncertainty flicker across her face. Then it was gone, replaced by that cool composure she wore like armor. "Maybe it's time for change," she said. The kitchen door closed behind her with a soft click. I heard her heels on the hardwood floor, the jingle of keys, the front door opening and closing, the sound of her car starting in the driveway. I stood alone in the garage, surrounded by tools and motor oil and the lingering scent of her perfume. The Honda's engine ticked as it cooled, and somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I pulled out my phone and opened the banking app. Joint checking account, frozen. Savings account, frozen. Credit cards, canceled. It took less than 5 minutes to lock down everything we shared financially. The beauty of being the tech-savvy spouse was knowing exactly which buttons to push. Next, I logged into our home network and changed all the passwords. Wi-Fi, streaming services, smart home controls, everything. If Melissa wanted to explore other options, she could do it without my resources. I wasn't angry. Anger was hot and messy and made you do stupid things. This was something else entirely. This was methodical, calculated, fair. She'd made her choice. Now she'd live with the consequences. The next morning brought the first consequence. I was in my home office, nursing my second cup of coffee and reviewing the Morrison audit files, when my phone buzzed with a text from Melissa. "My cards aren't working. Fix this." I typed back, "New policy. Cash only for dating expenses." The phone rang immediately. "Jack, this is ridiculous. I need access to our accounts." "Our accounts?" I said, leaning back in my desk chair. Interesting choice of words. Last night you were exploring other options. This morning you want joint finances. I'm still your wife. Are you? Because last night you were going on a date with another man. I'm having trouble keeping track of your current relationship status. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. Silence on the other end. I could picture her in her corner office downtown, probably pacing behind that massive glass desk her company had given her when she made senior marketing manager. We need to talk about this like adults, she said finally. I tried that last night. You were too busy getting ready for your date. One evening, Jack. I went to dinner with a colleague. A date, I corrected. Your word, not mine. Another pause. I'll be home tonight. We'll figure this out. Will you? Or do you have another date planned? She hung up. I finished my coffee and opened my laptop. The Morrison security audit could wait. I had more pressing matters to investigate. Melissa thought she was tech-savvy because she could post on social media and troubleshoot the occasional Wi-Fi problem. What she didn't understand was that being married to an IT security specialist meant leaving digital footprints everywhere. Cloud backups, shared photo streams, location services, browser histories on devices connected to our home network. It took me 20 minutes to find what I was looking for. Text messages going back 3 months, photos, voice messages. Melissa and Trent had been planning this for a long time. The messages started professional, then friendly, then intimate. By last month, they were making jokes about her boring husband and planning weekend getaways. The voice message from 2 weeks ago was the worst. Melissa's laugh, bright and genuine in a way I hadn't heard directed at me in years. He's so clueless, she said. Still thinks I'm working late when I'm with you. Poor Jack. He tries so hard to be interesting. Poor Jack. I stared at the screen, reading through months of betrayal laid out in blue and gray text bubbles. She hadn't just decided to date someone else. She'd been having an affair and planning her exit strategy while I fixed dinner and asked about her day and tried to keep our marriage alive. My phone buzzed with a new text from Harris, my best friend and former sparring partner from my amateur boxing days. He ran a gym downtown now, mostly training kids from the neighborhood, but he still kept a few bags available for old-timers like me. Haven't seen you in weeks. You getting soft? I looked at the messages on my screen, at the evidence of my wife's betrayal, at the careful way she'd planned every step while lying to my face. Be there in an hour, I typed back. And Harris? And I'm not feeling soft today. The gym smelled like sweat and leather and the industrial disinfectant Harris used to mop the floors. It was a small place tucked between a laundromat and a check-cashing store, but it was clean and well-maintained. Harris had put his heart into this place after he retired from the police force. You look like hell, he said when I walked in. Feel worse. I changed into old workout clothes and wrapped my hands while Harris set up the heavy bag. He was a big man, 6'3", with graying hair and scars on his knuckles from 20 years of police work, followed by 10 years of teaching kids how to channel their anger into something productive. Want to talk about it? He asked. Wife's cheating. Harris nodded like he'd been expecting this. How long? 3 months that I can prove, maybe longer. I started working the bag, throwing combinations that came back to me like muscle memory. Jab, cross, hook. The leather gave way under my fists, and the chain creaked with each impact. You confronting her? Already did. She told me she was going on a date and walked out. Damn. Harris held the bag steady as I threw a particularly hard cross. What's your play? That was Harris. Never asked if I was okay or offered empty sympathy. Just cut straight to the strategy. It's why we'd stayed friends for 20 years. Working on it, I said between punches. But she made a mistake. What's that? She thinks I'm poor Jack. Boring, clueless Jack who doesn't know what's happening in his own house. I threw a combination that made the bag swing wide. Harris had to step back to avoid getting hit. Maybe it's time to show her who Jack really is. The call came at 9:15 the next morning, just as I was settling in to actually work on the Morrison audit. Unknown number, but I recognized the voice immediately. Mr. Patterson, this is Jennifer Walsh from Hartwell Consulting. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention regarding your professional conduct. Hartwell was my biggest client, responsible for about 40% of my annual income. Jennifer was their HR director, and she sounded like someone reading from a script. What kind of concerns? We've received communications suggesting you may not be stable in your current personal situation. There are implications this could affect your judgment on sensitive security matters. My jaw clenched. What kind of communications? I'm not at liberty to discuss specifics, but we're placing your current contracts under review pending further investigation. I hung up and immediately called Harris. She went nuclear, I told him. The wife? Sent something to my clients. Probably those text messages I sent her last year when we were fighting about her working late. Taken out of context, they'd look controlling. Smart move, Harris admitted. Vicious, but smart. She always said I never took initiative in our relationship. Guess she was wrong about that. I spent the morning doing damage control, calling clients, and trying to explain without explaining. By lunch, I'd managed to keep most of my contracts, but Hartwell was gone. $15,000 in revenue. Vanished because my wife decided to wage economic warfare. That afternoon, I drove to Trent's neighborhood. He lived in one of those new developments on the north side of town, all smart homes and integrated technology. The kind of place where everything was connected to everything else, and security was more about convenience than actual protection. I parked across the street and opened my laptop. His Wi-Fi network was visible, along with about a dozen others in the area. Standard residential setup, probably using the default passwords that came with the equipment. It took me 10 minutes to get inside his network. Trent had smart lights, a smart thermostat, smart locks, and a smart security system. He also had a Ring doorbell, an Alexa in every room, and a work-from-home setup that included a high-end webcam for video calls. I waited until 6:30 when I knew he'd be logging in for the weekly marketing team meeting that Melissa had complained about for months. Then I started having some fun. First, I triggered every alarm in his house simultaneously. Smoke detectors, security system, carbon monoxide detector. The cacophony would be deafening. Next, I cranked his thermostat to 90 degrees and turned on every smart light in the house, strobing them in different colors. Finally, I activated his sprinkler system. I could see him through his home office window, frantically trying to shut everything off while water rained down from the ceiling. His laptop was soaked, his work papers scattered across the floor. And somewhere, his colleagues were watching this unfold through his webcam on their weekly video call. I packed up my laptop and drove home, humming along to the radio. That evening, Melissa came home looking like she'd been through a blender. Her perfect hair was disheveled, her makeup smeared, and she was carrying her heels instead of wearing them. "We need to talk," she said. "Sure, how was your day?" "Mine was interesting. Lost a major client because someone sent them private communications taken out of context." She had the decency to look uncomfortable. "Jack, But that's okay," I continued. "I found ways to stay busy. Did some consulting work for a friend. Pro bono." "What kind of consulting?" "Home security. Amazing how vulnerable these smart homes can be. One little breach and everything falls apart." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "You didn't." "Didn't what? Help someone identify weaknesses in their system. That's what I do for a living, Melissa." "Well, what I used to do before someone tried to destroy my reputation." She sank into the living room chair, the one she'd claimed as hers when we first moved into this house. "This has to stop." "I agree. You can start by calling Hartwell and explaining that you sent them private messages without context in an attempt to sabotage my business." I was angry. "So am I." She looked up at me, and I saw something I hadn't seen in months. Fear. Not of me, exactly, but of the situation spinning out of control. "What do you want?" she asked. "I want my wife back. But since she's apparently dating other people, I'll settle for basic respect." "And if I don't give it to you?" I smiled, and it felt sharp and cold. "Then you'll find out exactly how creative I can be with home security systems." The war escalated over the next 2 weeks. Melissa retaliated by spreading rumors through our social circle, painting me as a controlling husband who couldn't handle his wife's success. She had lunch with Dana, her closest friend, and by evening, the entire neighborhood seemed to know that I was struggling with the changing dynamics of modern marriage. But Melissa had made a critical error. She'd forgotten that I handled the IT security for half the small businesses in town, including the company where Dana's husband worked. It took me one afternoon to discover that Dana had been skimming from the company's petty cash account for months. I didn't report her. Instead, I had a quiet conversation with Dana over coffee. "Interesting bookkeeping system your husband's company uses," I mentioned casually. "Very trusting. Almost too trusting, if you know what I mean." Dana's face went white. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course not. But hypothetically, if someone were taking small amounts regularly, it would eventually show up in an audit, which coincidentally they're planning for next month." She stared at me across the coffee shop table. "What do you want?" "Just accuracy in the stories you tell. Melissa's been sharing some very creative interpretations of our marriage lately." "And if I don't?" Then I guess we'll see how understanding your husband is about creative bookkeeping. Within a week, the neighborhood gossip had shifted. Now the story was that Melissa had been having an affair for months, lying to everyone, and planning to leave her devoted husband for a younger man. It was amazing how quickly public opinion could change when you knew which pressure points to apply. But my masterpiece was still to come. I'd been monitoring Trent's digital life for weeks, learning his patterns, his weaknesses, his secrets. He was sloppy with security, the kind of person who used the same password for everything and clicked on suspicious links without thinking. What I found was better than I'd hoped. Trent and Melissa hadn't just been having an affair. They'd been skimming money from marketing campaign budgets, using company credit cards for personal expenses, and billing their romantic getaways as business trips. It wasn't enough to land them in prison, but it was definitely enough to get them fired and destroy their professional reputations. The beauty was in how they'd done it. Small amounts, spread across multiple campaigns, hidden in legitimate-looking expenses. They'd been careful, but not careful enough to hide from someone who knew how to trace digital transactions. I had everything. Credit card statements, hotel receipts, expense reports, even photos they'd taken during their business trips that clearly showed them on vacation together. I could have reported them immediately, but that would have been too simple, too clean. I wanted them to understand what betrayal felt like. Instead, I started leaving hints. An anonymous email to Melissa's boss about irregularities in campaign spending. A casual comment to Trent's supervisor about unusual expense patterns. Nothing direct, nothing that could be traced back to me, but enough to start raising questions. Within days, both of them were dealing with increased scrutiny from their supervisors. Melissa started coming home stressed, complaining about micromanagement and trust issues at work. She had no idea the investigation was just beginning. The final piece of my plan required patience, but it was worth the wait. Melissa's company was hosting their annual client appreciation event next month, a big party at the downtown hotel where all the executives would be schmoozing with their biggest accounts. Melissa had been planning this event for months, and its success would determine whether she got the promotion she'd been angling for. It was also the perfect venue for a very public revelation. "How's work going?" I asked her over dinner one evening, making conversation like a normal husband. "Fine," she said, not looking up from her phone. "Busy with the client event." "That's next month, right? Big deal for your career." "Hopefully." I nodded sympathetically. "I'm sure it'll go perfectly. You've always been so good at managing the details." She looked up at me suspiciously, probably wondering why I was being supportive instead of sarcastic. "Thanks," she said carefully. "Of course. We're still married, after all. I want you to succeed." What I didn't tell her was that I'd already bought a ticket to the event. As a potential client interested in their marketing services, I'd be sitting in the audience when she gave her presentation, and I'd be bringing some very interesting visual aids. The Riverside Hotel's ballroom was packed with 200 of the city's business elite, all gathered to celebrate another successful year of marketing excellence. Melissa stood at the podium in a navy blue dress I'd never seen before, probably bought with company funds, delivering her presentation about innovative campaign strategies and measurable results. I sat in the back, wearing my best suit and a visitor's badge that identified me as Jack Patterson, Patterson Security Consulting. To anyone who cared to look, I was just another potential client, taking notes and sipping overpriced wine. Melissa was in her element, confident and articulate, clicking through slides about market penetration and brand awareness. Her boss, a thin man named Richard, who I'd met at company Christmas parties, watched from the front row with obvious pride. She had no idea what was coming. "Our success this year has been built on trust," Melissa said, advancing to a slide about client relationships. "Trust between our team and our clients, trust in our processes, and trust in our commitment to excellence." I pulled out my phone and opened the presentation I'd prepared. With a few taps, I connected to the hotel's Wi-Fi network and accessed their audio-visual system. The beauty of hotel conference technology was that it was designed for convenience, not security. "We believe that transparency is the foundation of any successful partnership," Melissa continued. I smiled and hit send. The screen behind Melissa flickered, then changed. Instead of her marketing slides, the audience was now looking at a hotel receipt from the Ocean View Resort, dated 3 months ago, showing a 2-night stay for Mr. and Mrs. Trent Davidson. Melissa kept talking for a few seconds before she noticed the murmur from the audience. She turned to look at the screen, and her face went pale. "Technical difficulties," she said quickly, reaching for her laptop. "Let me just—" The screen changed again. Now it showed a series of text messages between Melissa and Trent, discussing how to hide their expenses and make their trips look like business travel. "Melissa, just put it under client development. Richard never checks those receipts anyway." Trent, "You're brilliant. No wonder I'm crazy about you. Melissa. Poor Jack thinks I'm working late again. If only he knew how hard I was working. LOL. The room had gone completely quiet. Richard was staring at the screen with his mouth open. Other executives were pulling out their phones, probably taking pictures. Melissa frantically clicked at her laptop, trying to regain control of the presentation, but I'd locked her out of the system. The next slide showed their expense reports side by side with credit card statements, highlighting the discrepancies. Meals for two billed as client meetings, hotel rooms charged to marketing campaigns that didn't exist, spa treatments and room service listed as research expenses. This isn't what it looks like, Melissa said into the microphone, but her voice was shaking. The final slide was a photo I'd found in Trent's cloud storage. Him and Melissa on a beach, drinks in hand, clearly on vacation. The timestamp showed it was taken during a business trip to evaluate potential advertising markets. Richard stood up slowly, his face red with anger or embarrassment or both. Melissa, please step away from the podium. Richard, I can explain. Step away from the podium, now. Security appeared from somewhere, probably hotel staff who'd been alerted by the commotion. They didn't touch Melissa, but they made it clear she should leave the stage. As she walked past my table, our eyes met. I raised my wine glass in a small salute. You warned me, she whispered, so quietly only I could hear. I did, I replied. But you walked out that door anyway. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Richard took the microphone and apologized to the clients, promising a full investigation and immediate corrective action. The party continued, but the mood was subdued, conversations happening in hushed tones and worried clusters. I finished my wine and left through the back exit, avoiding the crowd of reporters who had somehow already gathered in the lobby. Small-town scandals traveled fast, especially when they involved public humiliation and corporate misconduct. My phone was buzzing with text messages by the time I reached my car. Harris. Saw the news? You okay? Dana. Oh my God, Jack, I'm so sorry. My sister Becca. Mom saw it on Facebook. Call me. But nothing from Melissa. I drove home through the quiet streets, past the neighborhoods where we'd walked our dog and planned our future and pretended our marriage was working. The house was dark when I pulled into the driveway, and for a moment I wondered if she'd come home at all. Then I saw her car parked on the street, and I knew she was inside, probably sitting in the dark, trying to figure out how her carefully planned exit strategy had turned into a public disaster. I found her in the living room, still wearing the navy dress, makeup smeared from crying. She looked up when I walked in, and I saw something I'd never seen in her face before. Complete defeat. Are you satisfied? She asked. Are you? She laughed, but it came out broken and bitter. I lost my job. Trent lost his job. Everyone thinks we're criminals. Are you? You know we're not. It was just a creative accounting. Everyone does it. Everyone doesn't get caught. She stood up unsteadily, and I realized she'd been drinking. So what now? You've destroyed my career, humiliated me in front of the entire business community, and ruined any chance I had of starting over. What's left? I looked at her standing there in our living room, surrounded by 15 years of shared memories and broken promises, and felt nothing. No anger, no satisfaction, no regret. Just emptiness where my marriage used to be. Now you live with the consequences of your choices, I said. Just like I've been doing. She stared at me for a long moment, then picked up her purse and headed for the door. Where are you going? Does it matter? You've made it clear I'm not welcome here. You made that choice 3 weeks ago when you walked out to go on a date. She paused with her hand on the doorknob. I never meant for it to go this far. Yes, you did. You planned every step. The affair, the financial arrangements, the exit strategy. You just didn't plan for me to fight back. I didn't think you would. I warned you. I told you exactly what would happen if you walked out that door. She opened the door and stepped into the night, then turned back one last time. I loved you once, she said. I know, I replied, but you chose to love someone else more. The door closed behind her, and I was alone in the house we'd shared for 8 years. I poured myself a drink and sat in my chair, the one she'd never liked because it didn't match her decorating scheme. Outside, I heard her car start and drive away, probably heading to Trent's place or a hotel, or maybe her sister's house across town. It didn't matter. She'd made her choice, and I'd made mine. My phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. This isn't over. I typed back, Yes, it is. Then I blocked the number, finished my drink, and went to bed in the house that was finally completely mine. The next morning brought silence. No alarm clock set for 2 people, no coffee made for someone else, no conversation about schedules and plans, Just quiet and space and the freedom to decide what came next. I made coffee for one and sat at the kitchen table, reading the news coverage of last night's event. The local business journal had already posted an article about executive misconduct and corporate accountability. Melissa's name was mentioned prominently, along with Trent's and their photos from the company website. My phone rang. Harris. You see the news? Hard to miss. How you feeling? I considered the question seriously. Free. Good. You coming to the gym today? Yeah, I think I will. I hung up and looked around the kitchen, at the coffee cup that didn't have lipstick on the rim, at the newspaper that wasn't folded to the lifestyle section, at the silence that wasn't filled with passive-aggressive comments about my morning routine. Melissa had been right about one thing. It was time for change. I finished my coffee, got dressed, and drove to the gym. Harris was waiting with a heavy bag and a knowing smile. Ready to work? He asked. More than ready. I wrapped my hands and started throwing combinations, each punch landing with satisfying precision. The bag swung and creaked, and I felt the tension of the past month flowing out of my shoulders and arms. Feel better? Harris asked after I'd worked up a sweat. Getting there. What's next? I thought about it while I unwrapped my hands. What was next? I had a house to myself, a business to rebuild, and a future that was completely my own to decide. Whatever I want, I said. For the first time in 15 years, whatever I want. Harris nodded approvingly. Sounds like a good plan. I drove home through the afternoon sunshine, past the coffee shop where I'd confronted Dana, past the hotel where Melissa's career had ended, past all the places where our marriage had slowly fallen apart. But I wasn't thinking about the past anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow and the day after that, and all the days that stretched ahead without lies or betrayal, or the exhausting work of trying to save something that was already gone. Melissa had walked out that door 3 weeks ago, looking for other options. She'd found them, and so had I.